At this point in the war in Ukraine, it is challenging to discuss summer, spring or winter offensives. The Russian army has been on the offensive ever since the autumn of 2023. Their pressure on Ukrainian defenses sometimes increases, other times they are less regular, but they have not stopped attacking in the past 2 years, with only very minor success in the grand scheme of things, despite what the Kremlin's propaganda and its foreign mouthpieces want you to believe. All this amidst active diplomacy of the United States, as Putin keeps imitating interest in finding a negotiated solution, while also insisting on maximalist and unrealistic demands. Welcome to another update from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job. Russia's strategy of winning the war in Ukraine remains unchanged. They have been relentlessly attacking different sectors of the battlefield, looking for weak points in the Ukrainian defenses. They have been losing many men in these probing attacks, seldom achieving meaningful advances. This is accompanied by the highest ever pace of combined missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, to degrade the country's critical infrastructure and defeat the will of the Ukrainian people to resist. Russia has more manpower resources to keep feeding Russian men into the war machine. And while the Russian economy is experiencing problems, it is still capable of financing the war. Thus, Putin believes that he will eventually prevail in this war of attrition. A little bit more pressure on Ukraine and the front will collapse. At least that's what Putin's generals are telling him. According to a Reuters article in August, they reportedly informed Putin that the Ukrainian front would fall apart within 2 to 3 months. Since the start of Donald Trump's second term as the American president, the Russian army has significantly increased pressure on Ukraine in order to achieve greater leverage in negotiations. Trump insists on ending the war immediately, and although Putin does not feel pressured enough to sign any deal, he would prefer to keep Trump on his good side. The calculation is that significant Russian progress on the battlefield would push Trump to put more pressure on Zelensky to agree to the Russian terms. But has Russia really achieved anything major? Anything that tells you Ukraine is on the brink of defeat? Let's look at Russia's immediate targets at this point in the war. Earlier, Putin announced Russia's intention to create a buffer zone on the border with Ukraine to prevent incursions like the one the Ukrainians achieved in Kursk. Have they succeeded? No. The Kharkiv front has not moved at all since May 2024. In Sumy, the Ukrainians have been liberating ground since the start of summer. Another immediate military political goal is the complete capture of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. Russia has controlled virtually all of Luhansk since 2022, but Donetsk has been another story. They have won several important battles, such as in Bakhmut and Avdiivka, and have achieved localized breakthroughs, like in Attrition. However, the Russian army has not even reached the most heavily fortified fortress belt of the Donbas, including the cities of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka and Kostiantynivka. Their immediate goals are Pokrovsk and Liman. They have made only a minor advance towards Liman this summer. Their progress around Pokrovsk has been more impressive, but this important logistics hub is still in Ukraine's hands. Russian forward units have begun entering Pokrovsk proper since July, but they have not yet established a secure foothold within the city. It is important to understand the nature of the fighting in Ukraine right now to understand why the Russians managed to enter Pokrovsk. The front line in Ukraine does not have a World War I-style endless line of trenches and million-man armies defending these trenches. Much smaller armies fight the war in Ukraine. The available manpower is insufficient to cover all of the vast front line, especially in Ukraine's case. The Ukrainian army's defense relies on strongholds and outposts in tactically important positions to deter the enemy, while drone units are responsible for detecting the enemy's movement towards Ukrainian positions. Since the start of 2025, Russia has not been using tanks and armored vehicles in their assaults, given very high losses suffered at the hands of Ukrainian drones, and they're using small motorcycle units or infantry groups instead to avoid detection, which often move during the dark using anti-night vision equipment. These small groups then take positions in the Ukrainian rear with two key missions. The first is to identify the location of Ukrainian drone operation units and to eliminate them. The second is to wait for more mobile groups to arrive until their force is big enough to assault the Ukrainian positions. This is what happened northwest of Pokrovsk in August. The mobile groups of the Russian 132nd Brigade rapidly moved from Novotoretsk to Vesela and Zoloty Kolodets. The Russians would have been on the brink of capturing the key artery between Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk, the TO514 highway. But a Ukrainian counterattack led by the 1st Azov Corps liberated several villages, preventing the Russians from gaining a foothold in this area and encircling the remaining Russian soldiers in the area between Rubizhne and Kucherev Yar. So the battle for Pokrovsk is very much ongoing. It may last for months, given the usual pace of Russian advances, as seen in the battles of Toretsk and Chasiv Yar. Another immediate target of the Russian army is Kupiansk. On this front, the Russians have been trying to dislodge the Ukrainians from the eastern bank of the Oskil since late 2023, and after almost 2 years of fighting, they have managed to dissect the Ukrainian bridgehead into two. To capture the northern bridgehead, they must capture Kupiansk and sever the main lines of communication leading to it. For a long time, the Russian army has been banging its head against the wall in Sinkivka. However, in the summer, the Russians managed to break through to the northern outskirts of Kupiansk via Radkivka, bypassing Sinkivka at one point, and reached Sobolivka, coming dangerously close to the PO7 highway. But by late August, a series of Ukrainian counterattacks pushed the Russians out of the northern outskirts of Kupiansk. Here, the heavy battles do not relent, but the Russians have not yet reached their immediate goal in this sector either. The Kherson front has not moved since Ukraine's counteroffensive in 2022, while despite reports of Russian preparations to attack on the Zaporizhia front, there have been barely any meaningful changes here in the past 2 years either. So, despite all the massive pressure the Russians put on the Ukrainians on the battlefield, and despite their major losses, in the grand scheme of things, the front line in Ukraine has barely moved. Of course, aerial warfare is another key component of Putin's war in Ukraine. We have already reported about the increased domestic production of Shahed drones and the addition of new modifications, which make it harder to shoot them down. This has enabled Russia to strike Ukraine more regularly and with a higher number of drones. A higher number of cheap drones are launched, and they overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses, enabling more Russian ballistic and cruise missiles to strike Ukrainian cities. For instance, on August 28th, Russia launched almost 600 drones, 11 ballistic missiles, and 20 cruise missiles, killing more than 20 people. But this has long turned into a game which two can play. Ukraine has been relentlessly expanding its ability to strike deep inside Russia by manufacturing new long-range drones. Most recently, Ukraine started producing Flamingo cruise missiles, which reportedly have a 3,000-kilometer range and an over 1-ton warhead. There are some rumors that Flamingo has already been tested on the battlefield, but we will have a better understanding of its effectiveness against the Russian air defenses in the upcoming months. For now, Ukraine continues to rely on its drones, mostly targeting Russia's military production facilities and oil refineries. In August, Ukraine successfully struck several refineries, causing tangible problems for Russia. We have seen videos of very long queues for gasoline in Russian gas stations due to the reported shortages. According to Reuters, Ukrainian strikes on 10 oil refineries have caused disruptions of at least 17% of Russia's refining capabilities. The Moscow Times reported that the prices of AI-92 and AI-95 type gasoline in Russia has increased by 38 to 49% respectively since the start of 2025 due to the Ukrainian strikes. As we have already said in our previous videos, Russia's economic woes, such as rising inflation, high rates of non-payment of loans, and labor shortages are causing additional problems. Putin may posture otherwise, but Russia is not in the best position either, with huge amounts of resources already expended on the battlefield, without much result. So Putin was not able to put himself in a militarily dominant position on the eve of his Alaska meeting with Trump. The meeting, which took place largely due to poor translation, lack of understanding, and probably no note-taking by Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff during his meeting with Putin. The media reports that Witkoff initially told Trump that Putin was ready to return the occupied portions of Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts in exchange for full control of Donbas. Admittedly, had this been a real situation, it would have been the first real signal that Putin is ready to negotiate. It later became clear that Putin's offer consisted of Ukraine giving up Donbas in exchange for Russia freezing the war at the current lines elsewhere as a starting point for negotiations. And that is a non-starter for Ukraine, because giving up the most fortified and well-defended part of the country without any real security guarantees against any further Russian attacks would mean inviting Putin to attack again after some time without needing to bleed for the fortress belt. So naturally Kyiv rejected this offer and presented its counteroffer. Zelensky wants an immediate and durable ceasefire before any talks about the territorial situation. He demands compensation for damages inflicted by the Russian attack, security guarantees, continuation of the sanctions regime, and return of all POWs and children kidnapped by Russia from occupied Ukraine. In that sense, given the gulf between Ukraine and Russia's positions on what the end of this war should look like, the Alaska meeting was doomed to fail. Nothing tangible came out of the meeting, barring two notable changes in Trump's rhetoric. Previously, Trump was in favor of an immediate ceasefire before the start of negotiations. Over time, Zelensky and European leaders agreed to this position to make sure that Trump remains on their side. However, after meeting with Putin, Trump began discussing the need to reach a comprehensive agreement before a ceasefire. Another notable change is how much more often Trump started talking about security guarantees for Ukraine. Reuters and the Financial Times have speculated based on their sources that the United States may offer air defense, intelligence and other types of support with no boots on the ground to the European peacekeeping force, which may be deployed in Ukraine. Trump's vision of how this security framework for Ukraine may look like is not entirely clear, but the very fact that Trump implies the possibility of American involvement in some shape is a good development for Kyiv. 3 days after the Alaska meeting, Zelensky and European leaders went to Washington, D.C. to meet with Trump. And it went much better than the February debacle in the White House, but there was also no breakthrough. The Financial Times reported that Ukraine wants to purchase $100 billion worth of weapons from the United States, but there has not been any official confirmation of this. Still, the European allies are already purchasing weapons from the United States for Ukraine. There are reports that the United States will sell AMRAAM missiles and other relevant supporting equipment worth $3.5 billion, maintenance equipment for M777 howitzers worth more than $100 million, Patriot air defense missiles and components worth €500 million, and another $500 million package, including air defense systems, Patriot equipment, anti-tank systems, and 3,350 ERAM missiles worth $850 million to Ukraine. This is not aid anymore, and Europe and Ukraine would have to pay for further weapons and equipment from the United States. But August has been the most stable month in terms of deliveries and commitments from America for quite a while. Ukraine continues to receive support from other allies too. On August 8th, the EU announced another tranche of direct financial aid. The Czech Prime Minister Fiala stated that Ukraine has already received 1 million artillery shells within the framework of the Czech Ammunition Initiative. The German Vice-Chancellor Klingbeil said that Germany will allocate €9 billion annually to Ukraine for the next 2 years. The Canadian Prime Minister Carney stated that the earlier announced $2 billion Canadian military aid package, consisting of drones, armoured vehicles and munitions, will be delivered by September. So the foreign military aid to Ukraine is flowing rather stably after the disruptions which started in 2024. Ukraine is also ramping up its domestic manufacturing. But it is clear that the Ukrainian public is getting tired of the war too. Almost 70% of Ukrainians now prefer for the war to end in negotiations, but they still remain categorically opposed to Putin's demands of capitulation. It is evident that this long war is causing fatigue and creating more and more problems in Ukraine and Russia, and neither side appears capable of inflicting a decisive blow on the enemy to end the war in the short term. The German Chancellor Merz said that he was preparing himself inwardly for this war to last a long time, as neither Ukraine nor Russia appear to be on the brink of military defeat or economic exhaustion, which are usual causes of wars ending. Lastly, let's look at the visually documented equipment losses suffered by both parties as of September 3rd, brought to you by the Oryx blog. Russia has lost at least 4,113 tanks, 10,147 vehicles, 303 command posts and communication stations, 2,135 artillery systems and vehicles, 163 aircraft, and 161 helicopters. Ukraine has lost at least 1,256 tanks, 5,022 vehicles, 60 command posts and communication stations, 988 artillery systems and vehicles, 111 aircraft, and 52 helicopters. Further updates on the Russian invasion of Ukraine are on the way. If you don't want to miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.